Thank you so much for joining me once again on this segment of the Social Protection Plaza. As the campaign heat is being turned on, I thought it would be very important for us to focus on the policy making process because as members of parliament, for instance, the key mandate is to make policies. So I thought we should look at what influences policy. Why is a certain policy issue able to make it to the table and not the other? So scholars have identified 3 key policy influences, and this is one of them is ideas, the next is interests, the other is institutions. This can either constrain a policy issue or facilitate a policy issue. So when we talk about ideas, we're looking at the way a policy issue is perceived, the meaning attached to a policy issue, and the general definition, the values, the norms that actually influence policy. So you're looking at how is a policy issue defined by the different stakeholders. So I'll try to explain this in terms of the social protection policies that we have, or social protection interventions, because these have really largely been influenced by ideas. And of course, ideas, interests, and institutions all work together. They give context and content to each other. So when we talk about social protection in Uganda, you realize that one of the biggest issues that have actually constrained the country from having a comprehensive or a very elaborate social protection policy is really the issue of ideas. So let's take an example of the Senior Citizens Grant. For a program or an intervention that was piloted back in 2010, it has actually taken us about 10 years to have this implemented or rolled out nationally. The national rollout, which is currently ongoing, which is also, you could say, taking for national rollout because old age or elderly starts at about 65 years and above. But for this particular intervention, we're looking at an intervention that is targeting people of 80 years plus. So it is still lacking when it comes to coverage because all older persons are not covered. And the key issue that has actually affected this particular intervention is really the interpretation of cash transfers. And cash transfers, especially at the technical level, were looked at as not really a good intervention policy, poverty alleviation strategy, because for some people they perceive cash transfers as being able to breed a dependency syndrome. So they think if you give people money, then you're going to breed dependency. There's been a bit of struggle to help the technical people to appreciate that actually cash transfers are a good tool, a good poverty alleviation tool. But also studies have actually proved otherwise, because for households that have actually been getting this senior citizens grant, we've seen that they've actually, it has improved their lifestyles. It has helped them, for instance, access assets. Someone actually is able to buy maybe animals or goats. Someone is able to pay, because these are old people, so someone is able to pay someone to work on their farm. But also, research has shown us that most of this money, a lot of times, it is used to support children to go to school. The old people are supporting their grandchildren or orphans, so they use this money to buy scholastic materials. But then also, the other idea that influences how social protection interventions or how governments respond when it comes to social protection is really the issue of a human rights approach to social protection. For countries that approach social protection as a human rights issue, they actually tend to have more elaborate schemes. But for countries where this is seen as a favor to a citizen, then definitely there's going to be challenges when it comes to budgeting. And we can tell from the years past the Senior Citizens Grant has been having challenges when it comes to funding. So you'll find that we've been having shortfalls because this program is supported by both the state and development partners. So government has been has most times failed to fulfill its part of the funding. So you find that you have a budget that has a shortfall when it comes to funding the Senior Citizens Grant. But then also the other issue about ideas and social protection, you will realize that for interventions that are largely funded by the World Bank, they tend to be market-based interventions, market activation. You look at, for instance, the labor-intensive public works that are actually going on in northern Uganda, some parts of eastern Uganda, and some parts of the west. These are market interventions whereby they pay people to do some work, and then so people are assured of some pay and some hours of work. So those are market-based interventions, and it is usually a strategy as used by the World Bank. But then when you look at interventions that are supported by DFID, for instance, and Irish Aid, that is a Senior Citizens Grant, because they look at it from the human rights perspective, these tend to be unconditional. For instance, the Senior Citizens Grant, it is you don't have to offer something for you to earn this money. So it is from the basic fact that this is a human right. Yeah, and then the other issue is, we talked about the other influence is really interests. So interests play a very, very critical role when it comes to what makes it to the policy table. Who has interest, who has, but then also that comes to power. So for instance, which group is interested in a particular policy. So unfortunately, we really do not have very strong trade unions, but in countries that have very strong trade unions, you realize that they actually have very elaborate employment and workforce policies. But when it comes to interests, the different civil society organizations, it's basically policy sources, power sources. Those tend to influence a lot on policy. So the interests underlying a particular policy issue will be able to influence whether this becomes a salient matter in a salient policy matter, or it doesn't. And then we have institutions, because all these actually they operate in institutions, and usually for a policy issue to become salient, that is for a policy issue to become important, it has to fit within the existing institutions, because as we all know, people are very averse to change. So when you bring up a policy issue that requires an overhaul of an existing system, it is likely to face a lot of resistance. So institutions in which these policies are supposed to be implemented, if they are totally different from the policy issue that you're trying to introduce, it is likely going to be very hard for this policy issue to be adopted. So interests, ideas, and institutions, they all have to play, they all have to be reinforcing each other for the policy issue to actually be adopted. So I think for people in advocacy, when you're trying to introduce a policy issue, you have to really look at all these issues to be able to appreciate that for an issue that is really, that does not, for instance, appeal to the political arm of the state, does not appeal to the technical arm of the state, it is going to be a bit challenging. So you actually have to come up with a lot or creative ways to make sure that this fits in the existing institutions. But also, the other thing that has really been of that has affected the implementation of social protection in the country is largely our institutions. So you're looking at, because social protection is about people, do we have enough data to track, identify, and actually implement these policies? So you look at all these challenges, So those are going to affect what we eventually come up with in the end. As we get excited about the different candidates who want to stand for the different political positions, we need to be able to study them critically, get to understand their values, get to know what ideas do they espouse, get to understand what are their influences behind them, what are their interests, because with that it will determine what kind of policies we end up with. And I think that is really it for now, and I'm very, very grateful that you take the time to listen to these videos, and I believe that we learn from each other. I believe that we help each other understand and push for social protection, because really this is about us. We are not going to have a country, because social protection is about interventions that help us reduce levels of vulnerability and inequality in our society. So, and especially now with the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people have been exposed to vulnerability. So we have to be able, and it is very important as we go to the election, to be able to understand what kind of leaders are we going to actually have going forward, because if we don't have the right leadership, then we are going to have continued levels of vulnerability, continued levels of poverty, and continued levels of inequality. So let us be very cautious. Let us listen to what these people are offering and be able to discern and be able to tell who are the right leaders. So I would recommend, for those who are really interested in understanding policy and the different influences that make a policy get to the table or not, to read this book, Comparative Public Policy by Annelise Dodds. It's very simplified. I know it is heavy on European examples, but its applicability is really universal. So try it out and you will enjoy it. Thank you so much.